Something is changing at the office, or where the office used to be, or in the relationship between the person and the work they do there. It is changing slowly enough that most people have not named it yet. The change happens in quarters. A function that required a team of 5 now requires a team of 3. A task that took a week now takes an afternoon. A role that was entry-level becomes contingent. These are small adjustments, each of which has a local explanation, each of which is locally true, and none of which, in isolation, announces itself as a civilizational event. But the accumulation is something. Let yourself settle into this. The chair beneath you, the stillness of the room, the slow rhythm of your breathing. What we are going to do tonight is take an inventory. Not a frightening one, not an optimistic one, a calm one. The kind of inventory that a thoughtful person takes when they want to understand what is actually happening, as opposed to what they hope is happening or what they fear is happening. What jobs are changing? Which ones are in the most immediate path of change? Which ones are more resilient than people assume? What the history of similar moments tells us. What the evidence actually says when you read the studies rather than the headlines about the studies. This is not a small topic. It is, arguably, one of the defining economic questions of the next 2 decades. So we will move through it slowly, one section at a time, with pauses for the information to settle. Begin with the numbers that anchor the debate, because the numbers are real and they are large, and they have been misread in both directions. In 2013, 2 economists at the University of Oxford published a paper called The Future of Employment. The economists were Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne. They analyzed 702 detailed occupational categories used by the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. For each occupation, they assessed the probability that it would become susceptible to computerization within the following 20 years. Their headline conclusion was that approximately 47% of total United States employment was at high risk. 47% is a large number. It is also a number that has been badly misread in both directions. Some people encountered it as confirmation that half of all jobs would disappear. Some dismissed it as scaremongering by academics who did not understand how economies actually work. Neither reading is quite right. Frey and Osborne were measuring risk of a specific kind, which is the risk that the primary tasks of an occupation become automatable. They were not predicting that all 47% of those jobs would disappear. They were predicting that the jobs in that category faced meaningful probability of significant transformation. This is a more careful claim, and it is one that the evidence has, in the years since, partially supported. At the very high end of their risk estimates, occupations like telemarketer, title examiner, and certain kinds of data entry work were assigned probabilities approaching 99%. These were roles defined almost entirely by tasks that software can perform, in the relevant sense, at least as well as a human. The evidence since 2013 has been consistent with those assessments. These roles have contracted quietly in ways that rarely generate headlines. At the low end, therapists and surgeons were near zero. Roles requiring physical variability, human relationship, real-time judgment in chaotic environments. The evidence on these has also been consistent. In 2023, Goldman Sachs published its own analysis, framed differently. The Goldman report estimated that approximately 300 million full-time equivalent jobs globally could be affected by generative AI. The word affected was chosen carefully. It covers significant task changes, not necessarily full elimination. The same report found that current AI systems can match or outperform up to 47% of industry professionals on a defined set of economically valuable tasks. The McKinsey Global Institute, updating its prior work in light of generative AI, projected that up to 800 million jobs could be displaced by automation by 2030, and that 30% of United States work hours could be automated within that period. The World Economic Forum, in its 2025 Future of Jobs report, put the numbers in a different frame. 92 million roles displaced globally by 2030, 170 million new roles created, a net positive of 78 million. The WEF is telling a churn story, not an apocalypse story. Rapid transformation, with the overall count of jobs growing rather than shrinking, though with enormous variation in who benefits and who bears the cost. And then there is Darren Acemoglu, who shared the 2024 Nobel Prize in Economics and who has spent years studying how technology changes labor markets. His 2024 paper on the simple macroeconomics of AI argues that over the next 10 years, AI will produce a GDP increase of roughly 1 to 2%, an annual productivity gain of around 0.05%. He estimates that less than 5% of all tasks will be automated in the near future, and argues that firms are currently deploying AI primarily for human replacement rather than human enhancement. These numbers are very different from Goldman and McKinsey. They are not necessarily contradicting. They are measuring different things over different timeframes with different assumptions. Acemoglu is deliberately cautious and near-term. Goldman is broader and includes task-level disruption that does not equal job elimination. McKinsey is aggregate and long-term. What they agree on is that something is happening at a scale worth measuring. Let the numbers rest for a moment. Numbers need time to become real. They need to connect to something that has texture. The jobs most at immediate risk share a specific profile: high information processing load, low physical variability, finite decision trees, outputs that can be evaluated cheaply. They are roles where the work can be described clearly enough to become, in the language of AI systems, a prompt. Data entry operators carry risk estimates approaching 95% across multiple assessments. AI parses documents faster than humans, with fewer errors, and without fatigue. The volume of documents requiring processing is not shrinking, but the number of humans required to process them is. Customer service representatives carry risk around 80%. The majority of service interactions are variations on a finite number of queries that can be answered from a knowledge base. Approximately 2.8 million United States positions are in this category. The shift is already visible in the widespread deployment of AI chat systems, not always satisfying for the person seeking help, but functional for a large percentage of routine transactions. Paralegals and legal assistants sit in a high-exposure category. Generative AI can perform legal research, draft contracts, summarize case law, and review documents for relevant clauses at a fraction of the hourly cost of a junior associate. The strategic judgment of senior attorneys and the client relationship work remain human. The document review layer is contracting, not collapsing, but contracting. Accountants face high exposure in specific tasks: data reconciliation, variance analysis, routine financial reporting. The overall profession is not disappearing, but entry-level accounting work is being absorbed into software, which means fewer people enter the profession at the bottom and work their way up. The pipeline changes shape. Translators and interpreters appear near the top of a Microsoft research analysis from 2025, which ranked occupations by their exposure to large language model capabilities. Machine translation quality has crossed a threshold for many language pairs that makes it functional for a large proportion of translation needs. What remains for human translators is high-stakes, high-nuance, live context work where errors carry serious consequences. That is a real category. It is a smaller category than it was. Computer programmers sit in an interesting position. AI code generation tools have substantially compressed the time needed for routine scripting and boilerplate generation. The programmer who writes standard web application infrastructure is more exposed than the architect who designs distributed systems. Entry-level coding roles are contracting. This is significant because entry-level coding was, for a generation, one of the most reliable pathways into a well-compensated career. That pathway is narrowing. Let this settle. We are not finished, but the weight of what has been said so far needs room. Now for the jobs that are more resilient than people tend to assume, because the picture is genuinely uneven, and the uneven parts are important. Construction and skilled trades appear near the bottom of nearly every major automation risk assessment. A plumber navigating the pipe configuration of a 1940s building in a flooded basement is doing something that resists automation not because we haven't tried, but because the physical variability, the spatial judgment, the improvisation in response to unexpected conditions. This is extraordinarily difficult to replicate with machines, at a cost that makes economic sense. The trades are not immune, but they are substantially more protected than knowledge work in the near term, for structural reasons that are not changing quickly. Emergency medical technicians and first responders appear similarly protected. The work requires split-second judgment in chaotic physical environments, legally accountable real-time decisions with human life at stake. AI assists in dispatch optimization and triage. It does not yet replace the person in the back of the ambulance. Social workers and clinical therapists carry low automation risk by most assessments. The therapeutic relationship depends on perceived human empathy, cultural attunement, attunement to subtext and silence, and the thousand things that happen in a room between people that are not captured in text. AI-assisted screening tools exist and are expanding, but clinical social work, at its core, requires a presence that AI does not currently provide. Personal care aides and home health workers appear in multiple projections as among the fastest-growing occupations in the coming decade. The aging demographic wave in wealthy countries creates sustained demand for work that involves physical care, medication management, and human companionship. These are roles where the automation barrier is high and the demographic driver is strong. There is a data point from PwC's AI Jobs Barometer worth dwelling on. They found that wages are rising faster in industries most exposed to AI than in those least exposed, nearly twice as fast. This is counterintuitive. You would expect exposure to AI to depress wages if AI is replacing workers. What the data appears to show instead is that workers who can use AI tools effectively are commanding a premium in the market. The tool is making the skilled practitioner more productive, and the market is recognizing that productivity. This is a real phenomenon. It is also unevenly distributed. The premium accrues to workers who are already in higher skilled roles and who have the technical fluency to use AI tools effectively. It does not accrue equally to all workers in exposed industries. The radiologist's story is the most instructive case in the entire debate, not because radiologists are the most important occupation, but because it illustrates the pattern most clearly. In 2016, at an industry conference, Geoffrey Hinton, who was then a senior researcher at Google, made a prediction. People should stop training radiologists now, he said. He argued that deep learning would outperform human radiologists within 5 to 10 years. He was right about the capability trajectory. AI systems for medical image analysis have improved dramatically. They can detect certain cancers and other conditions with accuracy that compares favorably to human radiologists on specific benchmarks. In narrow, well-defined tasks, the technical claims hold. What did not happen was the disappearance of radiologists. When Hinton was asked about his 2016 prediction years later, he acknowledged in emails to journalists that he had spoken too broadly. He meant only image analysis. He was wrong on the timeline for clinical adoption. The reason the employment prediction did not come true is regulatory and legal, not technical. A radiologist who produces a diagnostic report carries legal liability for that report. A software system does not. Insurers and hospitals have been reluctant to allow AI to produce diagnostic reports without physician oversight because the liability structure does not accommodate it. This may change, but it has not changed on the timescale Hinton's prediction implied. What has changed is the shape of the work. AI is used to prioritize scan queues, flagging the cases most likely to be urgent for human review first. AI enhances image quality. AI assists with report summarization. New subfields have emerged, radiomics and radiogenomics, that combine imaging data with molecular markers, creating roles that did not exist when Hinton made his prediction. The specialty adapted. The employment did not collapse, the work changed. This is the pattern across many professions. Not elimination but reorganization. Not the end of the job but the renegotiation of what the job is. Let yourself breathe for a moment. The middle of a long thought deserves a pause. The history of technological change and labor markets offers a pattern worth understanding. Not because history repeats exactly, but because the mechanisms that have produced previous outcomes may be operating again. When the power loom automated weaving during the Industrial Revolution, it automated approximately 98% of the labor required to weave a yard of cloth. This sounds like the end of weaving employment. It was not. The number of hand loom weavers in England continued to grow for decades after the power loom's introduction. The mechanism, automation, collapsed the price of cloth, which expanded demand enormously, and the total amount of weaving grew far faster than per yard labor requirements fell. The industry grew larger, not smaller. The ATM arrived in the United States in the 1970s. By 2019, there were roughly 400,000 ATMs across the country. The number of bank teller jobs did not fall. It doubled. In 1970, approximately 250,000 bank tellers worked in the United States. By 2019, that figure had grown to roughly 500,000. The mechanism, ATMs, reduced the cost per transaction, which reduced the cost of operating a branch, which made it economically viable to open more branches in more locations, which required human tellers for the non-transactional work that machines could not do. The spreadsheet arrived in 1979. Every prediction suggested it would eliminate bookkeeping and accounting. Instead, accountants grew by 75% in a decade. The spreadsheet made financial analysis economically feasible for smaller organizations that previously couldn't afford it, creating demand that more than offset the labor efficiency gains within existing organizations. The pattern in each case is the same. A tool automates a bottleneck task. The cost of related activity falls. Demand for the broader activity expands. The humans in the field shift toward the work the tool cannot do. The overall count grows, though the composition changes. This pattern is real. It is also, potentially, not the pattern of the current moment. The economists who study this carefully disagree about whether the current wave of AI is the same kind of automation or something different. The argument that it is different runs like this. Previous automation targeted manual and clerical tasks. It created demand for cognitive workers who could use the new tools. But generative AI is targeting cognitive work directly. There is no adjacent tier of human cognitive labor toward which displaced knowledge workers can shift. The machine is not replacing the hammer. It is replacing the engineer. The argument that it is the same runs like this. We have been wrong before about the uniqueness of each wave. Each previous moment of technological displacement seemed categorical and irreversible. Each time, new categories of work emerged that no one predicted in advance. The argument that this time is different has been made, and been wrong many times. Humility about the predictive power of current analyses is warranted. Both arguments are serious. Neither has won decisively. Let the arguments rest. You have held a great deal of information. You are not required to resolve it. What does the timeline actually look like, if you follow the research as carefully as possible? In the period from 2025 through 2027, we are in the current phase. Customer service AI is being deployed at scale. Administrative and data entry roles in large organizations are contracting. Entry-level coding positions are shrinking. An estimated 7.5 million data entry and administrative jobs globally could be eliminated by 2027, not as a projection, but as the trailing edge of decisions already made. Retail checkout automation is ongoing. This phase is not future, it is present. In the period from 2027 through 2030, researchers identify an acceleration. Autonomous vehicle technology is projected to reach commercial deployment at meaningful scale, putting approximately 1.5 million United States trucking jobs at risk over this window. Global manufacturing could lose substantial employment if robotics automation continues on its current trajectory. The compounding productivity effects of AI across knowledge work sectors become more systemic. Changes that were localized to specific industries in the first phase spread across the economy. After 2030, the projections become genuinely speculative. Some figures circulate suggesting 50% of jobs automated by 2045. Economists treat such numbers with significant uncertainty. The near term is measurable. The long term depends on regulatory choices, social responses, and the pace of physical robotics development as much as software advances. Physical robots that can operate reliably in unstructured environments remain expensive and limited. That may change, but how it changes and when is not predictable with confidence. Darren Acemoglu and his collaborator Pascual Restrepo have formalized what may be the most useful analytical tool for thinking about this. They describe what happens when you analyze labor markets at the level of tasks rather than jobs. A job title is a bundle of tasks. Very few job titles map to a single task. When you measure AI exposure at the task level rather than the job level, the picture changes. Roughly 80% of United States workers have at least 10% of their tasks exposed to large language model assistants, according to one careful analysis. But having 10% of your tasks augmented by AI is very different from losing the job. It may mean becoming more productive. It may mean doing more in less time. It may mean the 10% of your tasks that were most routine are now done by a machine, freeing your attention for the tasks that require judgment and relationship and physical presence. The jobs that will survive intact are not necessarily the ones that seem safest. The jobs that will survive are the ones whose task structure contains a high proportion of work that requires embodied presence, real-time judgment under uncertainty, ongoing human relationship, or physical adaptability in unstructured environments. The jobs at greatest risk are not necessarily the lowest status ones. Some high-status, high-compensation knowledge work is quite vulnerable because high status accrued to it precisely because it required rare cognitive skills that machines are now replicating. Junior legal work, entry-level financial analysis, basic software development. These were prestigious and well compensated exactly because the cognitive tasks involved were hard. As those tasks become easier for machines, the labor market renegotiates its terms. New jobs are being created. AI trainers and data specialists, people who prepare and annotate and evaluate the outputs of AI systems, are a growing category. Specialized annotation for medical imaging, legal documents, nuanced language evaluation commands real compensation. AI ethics consultants and compliance officers are emerging as regulatory frameworks develop. Data center construction created more than 110,000 United States construction jobs in 2024. The operational layer of AI infrastructure, the engineers and cooling specialists and power systems designers, is a growth area. Whether these new jobs will absorb the workers displaced from contracting roles at comparable compensation in comparable geographic locations is the real question. The aggregate numbers may be neutral or positive. The distributional impact is less certain. Workers who can develop fluency with AI tools, who can redirect their attention toward the judgment and relationship and physical adaptability that machines cannot yet replicate, will likely find themselves in a better position than workers who wait for the landscape to stabilize before adjusting. The landscape is not going to stabilize, not in the time frame that matters for a career. The geography of the disruption matters. Advanced economies, where knowledge work is concentrated, face higher task-level exposure. The IMF estimates AI exposure at approximately 60% of jobs in advanced economies versus 40% in emerging markets and 26% in low-income countries. But lower exposure does not translate cleanly to lower vulnerability. Wealthy nations have fiscal capacity for reskilling programs, stronger social protection, and institutional infrastructure for managing labor transition. Low-income countries have fewer of these tools. Additionally, the manufacturing-led development model that moved hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in Asia is being challenged as manufacturing becomes more capital-intensive. AI threatens not just specific jobs in developing countries, but the development pathway itself. Within wealthy countries, the distribution of who is most exposed reveals patterns worth understanding. Approximately 86% of workers in the highest risk categories are women. This reflects the concentration of women in administrative support, customer service, and clerical roles. Entry-level positions face higher immediate risk than senior positions across most sectors. The workers who benefit most from AI augmentation tend to already be in higher paid, more analytical roles. The workers who face substitution risk tend to be in lower paid, more routine-intensive roles. The technology, if allowed to deploy without redistribution mechanisms, will concentrate its gains among those who were already gaining. PwC found that wages are rising faster in AI-exposed industries. This is real, but it primarily captures the premium paid to workers who can use AI tools effectively, not a broad uplift for all workers in those industries. The worker who cannot use the tools, in an industry being transformed by the tools, faces a different outcome than the data suggests at the aggregate level. Let the breath slow now. The inventory is nearly complete, not a frightening inventory and not an optimistic one, a complicated one. The honest synthesis of what the research says is something like this. A large and growing portion of the tasks that constitute paid work are being affected by AI in ways that range from mild augmentation to significant displacement. The effects are uneven across occupations, geographies, income levels, and genders. The historical pattern of prior technological waves suggests that aggregate employment can survive and recover, but recovery is never uniform, and the people who bear the transition costs are not always the people who capture the gains. The question of whether current AI is different from prior automation in kind, not just degree, is genuinely unresolved among serious economists. The possibility that it is different, and that the usual historical reassurances do not apply, is not alarmist. It is an intellectually honest acknowledgement that the tools we have for prediction were built on data from a world that may not be a reliable guide to this one. What the evidence does not support is either extreme. It does not support the view that the economy will absorb AI disruption seamlessly, as it has absorbed prior waves of automation, with minimal net job loss and broadly shared gains. It does not support the view that most jobs will disappear within a decade and civilization will be transformed beyond recognition. It supports something more complicated, more uneven, more dependent on choices that societies and companies and governments are making now about how to deploy and regulate and redistribute the gains of this technology. The jobs that will change are, in the end, most jobs, in some way, at some pace, in some proportion. The question is what they change into, whether the change is absorptive or disruptive, whether the new tasks that emerge are ones that the people currently doing the old tasks can reach, whether the institutions of labor and education and social protection adapt quickly enough to cushion the transition for the people who cannot simply update their skill set and move on. These are not technical questions. They are political and social and moral ones. They have technical inputs, but the answers to them will be determined by choices, not by outcomes that are already fixed. The night is deep now. The inventory is done. You have passed through the numbers and the specific occupations and the historical patterns and the research arguments. None of it requires resolution before you sleep. It requires only that it has moved through you, that you have given it the weight it asked for and no more. The world of work is changing. It has always been changing. The pace of the current change and the breadth of what it touches are different from prior moments. How different, and in what ways, and with what consequences for whom, these remain genuinely open questions that the most rigorous researchers in the world are actively working on. You can hold the uncertainty calmly. Uncertainty is not the same as danger. Not knowing what comes next is the condition of every generation that has ever lived through a transition. They held it too. Most of them slept. Let your body find its rest now. The inventory is complete. Sleep